What if D-Day had failed? What if the Allies never made it past the beaches? What if Nazi Germany had crushed the invasion before it even began? The consequences would have been catastrophic. The war might have dragged on for 5 more years, and the world as we know it might never have existed. June the 6th, 1944, D-Day, the largest amphibious invasion in history. 156,000 Allied troops launched from the coast of England to the beaches of Normandy, France. Their mission? To liberate Europe from Nazi control. Months of preparation, secrecy, and deception led to this moment. Operation Overlord wasn't just another battle, it was the turning point. 5 beaches, Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juneau, and Sword, became the stage for the fight to save the free world. American, British, and Canadian forces stormed the sand under a hail of gunfire, landmines, and barbed wire. The odds were terrifying. Success meant opening a Western front against Hitler. Failure meant total disaster. But what many don't realize is just how close it all came to failing. The weather almost cancelled the entire operation. Violent storms delayed the invasion by 24 hours. If those storms had continued for just one more day, the landings would have been postponed indefinitely. And then there's Hitler. On the morning of the invasion, Hitler was asleep. His generals were too afraid to wake him. Why? Because only Hitler had the authority to move Germany's panzer tank divisions. By the time he gave the order, it was too late. But what if he had been awake? What if the tanks had been unleashed in the early hours of the battle? Even without that, the Omaha beach landings were nearly a bloodbath. Communication failed. Naval support misfired. American troops were pinned down by machine gun fire. Survivors described it as a living nightmare. Just a few more minutes of German resistance, a slightly faster tank response, or a single lucky shot on a command ship, and the invasion could have collapsed. So now imagine a world where the worst happens. D-Day fails. The Allies are slaughtered on the beaches. The invasion is repelled. Panic spreads across Britain. American public support nosedives. Families who just lost sons on the beaches demand answers. In Washington, President Roosevelt faces intense political backlash. Churchill, already under pressure, sees his coalition falter. Parliament begins to question whether continuing the war is worth it. The Free French resistance, waiting for Allied support, is hunted down and crushed. With no Western front, Hitler redirects resources to the east. The Soviet Union, already bleeding millions of lives, is left to face the full fury of the Wehrmacht alone. Stalin considers negotiating peace. The Allies had hoped for a pincer movement, attacking from the west while the Soviets pushed from the east. Without that pressure, German forces begin to reclaim lost ground in the east, launching counter-offensives that cost hundreds of thousands more Soviet lives. With Soviet resistance weakening and no second front in sight, Moscow faces a dire choice. Some factions within the Soviet leadership push for peace talks. Stalin, unwilling to concede publicly but increasingly isolated, begins sending out feelers to neutral nations, hinting at a ceasefire. A fragmented Soviet Union begins to emerge as smaller republics seek autonomy to avoid further bloodshed. Nazi Germany, seizing the opportunity, installs puppet regimes in former Soviet territories, expanding its sphere of influence further east than ever imagined. Meanwhile, in Western Europe, resistance movements are decimated. The Gestapo unleashes a brutal wave of repression. Cities like Paris, Brussels, and Amsterdam fall completely under Nazi ideological control. Universities are purged, newspapers are nationalized, propaganda fills the airwaves, any trace of dissent is violently extinguished. The dream of liberation fades into silence. In Britain, the political landscape shifts dramatically. The Labour Party, initially united with Churchill's coalition, fractures under the weight of defeat. Protests erupt in London, Manchester and Liverpool. Demands for peace grow louder. Some politicians, labelled appeasers, argue for negotiations with Germany to prevent further bloodshed. Churchill, once hailed as a wartime hero, is forced to resign. Across the Atlantic, the United States reels from the failure. The cost in American lives is immense. D-Day becomes a national trauma. Isolationist voices gain power. Calls to bring American soldiers home from the Pacific intensify. Public trust in military leadership collapses. Congress slashes funding for European operations, and the focus shifts almost entirely to the Pacific theater. The Pacific War drags on. Without the Manhattan Project's full support, the atomic bomb is delayed by years. Instead of swift victory, the US engages in a grinding island-by-island campaign. Japanese resistance remains fierce. Casualties mount into the millions. By 1948, the US finally forces Japan to surrender, not with nuclear bombs, but through overwhelming conventional warfare. In the meantime, Nazi Germany has used the reprieve to consolidate power. Hitler's inner circle, now bolstered by renewed success, begins expanding the Nazi economic model. Europe is transformed into a vast military-industrial complex. Forced labor camps multiply. The SS becomes an omnipresent force, crushing any sign of rebellion. Schools indoctrinate children from a young age. German becomes the official language across much of the continent. By the early 1950s, a new geopolitical order has emerged. The Axis powers have fractured, with Japan subdued and Italy absorbed, but Germany remains dominant. The Third Reich spans from the Atlantic to the Urals. A new currency, the Reichsmark, becomes the standard. Cultural genocide wipes out minority languages and traditions. Surveillance technology, developed through military research, invades every corner of civilian life. In North America, the US remains a superpower, but a humbled one. Without the moral victory of Europe's liberation, American culture shifts inward. Paranoia about Nazi espionage runs rampant. The space race begins, but this time it's Germany, not the USSR, that launches the first satellite. Berlin, not Moscow or Washington, becomes the center of technological advancement. Civil rights movements in the US are delayed by decades. Without the horrors of Nazi ideology being fully exposed, the global moral reckoning around racism and genocide never truly happens. Segregation persists longer. International institutions like the United Nations never form. NATO is a pipe dream. The very idea of a united democratic front becomes a relic of a defeated past. By 1960, Germany develops nuclear-armed intercontinental missiles. A network of launch sites across Europe makes the Reich unchallengeable. Dissent within is quelled through fear, indoctrination, and absolute control of information. Former Allied nations become client states, their leaders puppets serving Berlin. And what of the Holocaust? Without liberation, the death camps continue operating into the 1950s. The final solution expands into new territories. The world's awareness of these atrocities is minimal, filtered through rumors and smuggled photographs. The phrase, "never again," is never spoken because it was never stopped. In this dark timeline, history becomes a weapon. Textbooks tell a different story. Children learn that the Allies were the aggressors, that fascism saved Europe from chaos. Truth is rewritten. Memory is manipulated. Resistance is impossible when the past itself has been erased. So much of what we take for granted today, freedom of speech, democracy, human rights, international cooperation, hangs on the razor's edge of June 6, 1944. It was more than a battle. It was a crossroad for civilization. Had it failed, the very fabric of the 20th century would have been torn apart. No European recovery, no decolonization, no global internet. no modern technology boom, the world would be locked in a cold, fascist dystopia where progress means domination and knowledge is power hoarded by the state. But it didn't happen by inches, by decisions, by chance. D-Day succeeded because brave men stormed impossible shores, because intelligence deceived German defenses, because Hitler overslept, because weather shifted, because people believed in something better. History isn't inevitable. It's a fragile chain of events, and any link can shatter. So the next time you think of D-Day, remember it was more than a victory. It was a miracle that saved the future. And if that miracle hadn't happened, you wouldn't be watching this video. If this vision of an alternate history made you reflect, subscribe for more thought-provoking explorations of what could have been. What other moments in history do you think could have changed everything? Let us know in the comments.